First verse. Jesus is all the world to me, my life, my joy, my all. He is my strength from day to day. Without him I would fall. When I am sad, to him I go. No other one can cheer me so. When I am sad, he makes me glad. He's my friend. Jesus is all the world to me. I want no better friend. I trust him now. I'll trust him when life's fleeting days shall end. Beautiful life with such a friend. Beautiful life that has no end. Eternal life, eternal joy. He's my friend.
Amen. I appreciate it, Jimmy. I've got a couple of the handouts that I passed out last week. If anybody needs one, just raise your hand. Don't need one back there. I'll just keep them back there, Daryl. Daryl got voluntold. I appreciate again y'all being here. I appreciate you watching us online, and we do want to extend the invitation for you guys online to come be with us in person. We'd love to have you here. We started looking at the parables last week, and I gave you a little sheet about really, and I went through some fairly boring stuff. I know about the history of interpretation of parables and how they went from allegory to non-allegory. Then I gave you that sheet that's got the kind of the interpretive principles, what we look for. When we interpret parables, it's really all of Scripture, but when we interpret parables, there are some questions that we have to ask, or some scenarios that we have to look into. So then we looked at the parable of the Good Samaritan, and kind of looked at it in context and what it meant and how it applied. Thank you, Don. And tonight we're going to look at the second one, and we're going to try to track these through Luke's Gospel for the most part. So we're in Luke chapter 12. So if you flip over to Luke chapter 12, and it's going to start in verse 13. This is a parable that everybody knows, but I don't think that it really means what most people think it means. I think, like I said last week, most parables have multiple meanings. One of the problems with parabolic interpretation over the years has been people think that there's just one meaning. You get one meaning out of it, that's it. But I don't think that's the case. I think there's several layers, kind of like peeling an onion. There's several layers to it. And I think that the one in chapter 12, Luke chapter 12, I think sometimes people miss the layers to it and miss the broader context of it. So I want to try to peel that back and look at it. So look at verse 13 in Luke chapter 12. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." So this is a parable. One of the things I told you last week was we always want to know what triggered it. Why did Jesus have to tell it? Jesus told these stories. They are, there's a lot of definitions for a parable. Earthly stories with heavenly meanings, that kind of stuff. But Jesus told these parables for a point. There's a reason that he did it. People understood what he's talking about. People could relate to the story. And then Jesus would always use it for that. He'd introduce this. But then usually it's after the parable is when the meat of it comes in, because that's when he kind of explains what he's talking about. Why is this important? And it happens with this too. Now, if you'll notice in verse 13, it says somebody in the crowd. And that's how this thing gets triggered. But this is a parable that is for the disciples. It's not really for the crowd. And so Jesus is now going to use the occasion of this guy coming up and saying, hey, as a matter of fact, he's wanting Jesus to be a mediator. And he said, hey, Jesus, tell my brother split the inheritance. Well, Jesus now is going to address this, and he's going to tell a story. But then he's going to turn around and not address the guy that asked the question. He's going to address the disciples. And he's going to say, here's what you need to know. And what he tells the disciples is what you and I need to know. So look at verse 13 again. It's kind of a somewhat graphic episode in Jesus' ministry. And verse 13 is very specific. It's over a family inheritance. It's sad to say, but most families get along real well until it comes to this. And then they want to haggle over inheritance. Yes, ma'am.
What chapter?
I'm sorry, Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Luke 12, 13. And so that's what happened here. There's one brother that tells Jesus to get on to his other brother. He said, Jesus, you gotta fix him. You gotta fix him. And if you look at the wording in verse 13, he calls him teacher, which means he's approaching Jesus as a rabbinic teacher. I mean, he knows he has some authority. And so he's looking at the letter of the law. He's looking at the Old Testament. He thinks Jesus is going to come with some kind of Old Testament thing and tell this guy, yeah, you're right, your brother needs to split this with you. So that's how this kind of thing happened. He just expects Jesus to settle this dispute, and he expects him to settle it in a very specific way. So Jesus is supposed to be the mediator here. Now, again, when he calls him teacher or rabbi, what it's kind of inferring is he's wanting Jesus to go back in the Old Testament and figure it out. Surely there's some kind of Old Testament principle that's going to apply here, and so you can help me out here. Because that's what rabbis in the Old Testament did. So he says to Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance. Look at Jesus' reply, verse 14. But he said to him, man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter over you? Why am I your mediator? Why am I in the middle of this? It's more complicated than it appears. The guy wants Jesus to settle this dispute, be an arbiter, a mediator, and he's wanting to do it from Old Testament teachings. However, the problem is the Old Testament says very little about inheritance. As a matter of fact, if you want to look these up sometime, Numbers chapter 27, verses 1 through 11, Numbers chapter 36, 7 through 9, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 15 through 17, that's it. That's all the Old Testament talks about inheritance law, or what it means to have to divide up an inheritance. And so this guy's coming to Jesus, wants something very specific, to which even if Jesus was just a regular run-of-the-mill rabbi, there wasn't a whole lot he could say, because the Bible, the Old Testament, didn't really say a whole lot about it. So he wants Jesus to mediate this. Now, Jesus' initial response in verse 14, who appointed me to do this? Well, why am I the mediator here? I mean, why are you looking at me to do this? It's kind of the way this is happening. And so what Jesus is going to do now is going to get to the heart of a deeper problem. And this is what I always try to say. No matter what you and me go through, no matter what's going on in our life, no matter what kind of sin it is, there's usually a deeper spiritual problem going on than just the outward sin. It manifests in lying or stealing or adultery or pornography or whatever it is. But there's an underlying spiritual problem that's at the heart of all that. Jesus is going to go to the heart of it. You read this and it looks like a guy just wants him to tell his brother to split the inheritance. But that's really not what Jesus is wanting to get out of this. And it's not for him, it's for the disciples. He's trying to tell the disciples. And by extension, he's telling me and you. So there's a lesson in here for what we're supposed to learn from this. And you look at this and think, well, what am I supposed to learn from this? Hopefully we're going to see that. But look at verse 15. Because we're not to the parable yet. All this is why he had to tell it. Then he said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of possessions. So again, he's getting to the heart of the matter. There's a deeper problem here than just this inheritance, which is more along the lines of greed. He's getting to that. And so what Jesus is going to do, and this is why Jesus is he's God after all, but this is why Jesus is the greatest teacher ever, because Jesus never really negotiates with us on our own terms. He doesn't deal with us the way we want him to. He deals with us on his terms. It's what he wants us to know. It's what he wants us to get out of it. If he would have just wanted to address this problem, this guy would have came up and said, hey, tell my brother split the money. And Jesus could have said, yeah, the Old Testament, says this or that. Hey, brother, split the money, and been done with it. But Jesus said there's something deeper going on there, something more spiritual going on here. And I want you to see it. In verse 15, he sets it up that it's going to be more about greed. But it even transcends greed. It goes beyond greed and it goes to something else that you and I are called to be and we're called to be responsible for. So look again at verse 15, because the second part of verse 15 is when Jesus really starts setting the stage for all this. He says, beware, be on your guard against every form of greed. And then watch this part, because this is the part where he really sets it up. For not even when one has an abundance, not even when you're rich, when you got all kind of stuff, does your life consist of just possessions. Now, when he says, if you track the pronouns through here, like in verse 16, he told them a parable. The them is the apostles. It's the disciples. And so when he's talking to the disciples, this guy comes up, he's teaching the disciples. This guy runs up, and this guy says, "Sell this argument for me." And Jesus said, "All right, let me tell you something. First of all, who appointed me judge? It's not something I'm going to be involved in, but beware of greed." Then you can imagine he turns to the disciples and he says, "Listen, even when you're rich, your life don't consist of just what you have. It's not about just your possessions." So he started to drill into the deeper issue. There's a deeper problem here than just money. Which is really a message for us. You and I are first world people. And even when we feel like we don't have a lot of stuff, we have way more than some people do. And we like to throw around the term, that's a first world problem, because we have an abundance of stuff. But our life doesn't consist in what we have. It's not about the things that you own. And Jesus is going to try to tell the disciples this. There's a reason he's going to do it. It's because, remember I told you, this is part of the journey section of Luke. Luke covers from chapter 9 to chapter 19. Luke covers the journey of Jesus to the cross. It's when he begins his way back to Jerusalem and he's going to die on the cross. And so we call it the journey section. And this is right in the middle of it. And in that journey section, what happens is all these Pharisees and all these people try to trick Jesus, try to lure him into some kind of theological trap. They're trying to, just like the lawyer did last week with the, who is my neighbor thing. And so now there's an opportunity for Jesus to specifically teach the disciples something that they need to know that's going to help them in the long run. It's going to help them when they don't even realize it's going to be helping them. So again, he's going to get at the root of this. Now look at this. And I want you to see how silly this is, because you and I do the same thing. Here's a father that dies, and he leaves some money. It doesn't say how much it is. I don't know if it's $100 or $5,000 or $2 million. I have no idea. But one brother, evidently the older brother, I guess, is holding on to the pocketbook. He got the money, and the other brother says, "Well, that's mine. Half of that's mine." Or 3/4 of it, or whatever, So there's a dispute about the money. And the other brother says, "No, this is mine." So they're arguing about it. So they go up to Jesus, and they say to Jesus, "Tell him to give me my half." You understand how ridiculous this is? Jesus is being asked to decide whose greed is the right greed. Which one of y'all's greed is right? Is your greed better because you want it all, or is your greed better because you want more than half, or what? Whose greed? That's what he's getting at. That's the whole point of this. Is Jesus is being put in the middle of this argument where he's being asked to tell whose greed is the better greed. That's the whole point of this thing. And so now Jesus in verse 16 is going to tell a parable, not just to that guy that asked the question, but to the disciples. And it's a spiritual parable is a spiritual thing for us that you and I can draw from that. So look at the parable in verse 16. Then he told him a parable saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. All right, so this guy's not poor, he's rich. I mean, this guy's got a lot of stuff. Verse 17, and he began reasoning to himself, which is probably the last thing we want to do, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, and I'll build larger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So that's the parable. That is the parable itself. The guy says, tell my brother to split the money. Jesus basically says, I'm not deciding on your greed. You know, I'm not going to figure out whose greed is better. I'm not putting myself in that position. And so then he says, let me tell you guys this story about what's really important. And he says that there is this guy who has a lot of stuff. He's got a lot of stuff. And this guy decides that his barn, his silos, whatever, they will hold all the stuff. And so he says to himself, man, I'm blessed. Man, I'm good. I've worked hard. I've earned all this cool stuff. I got to tear down that one. I got to build something bigger. You know, it's first world problem. You know, well, I got a 2-car garage, but I'm blessed. I got 4 cars. I'm all on my 4, and I ain't keeping my other 2 cars out in the weather. You know, they're going somewhere, so I got to tear down my 2-car garage. I got to build a 4-car garage. I got them all in there. You know, I got to put them in there. That kind of thing. That's what he's talking about. He said, this guy says, I got abundance of stuff. I'm very blessed because I got abundance of stuff. But I'm not going to think about how this impacts the kingdom or how I can enrich somebody else. I'm going to think about how I can prosper myself. So I'm going to say to myself, I'm going to reason within myself, justify, we call it justifying. I'm going to justify to myself why I need more stuff. That's what he's talking about. Why do I need more stuff? I've told you this kind of joking, kind of funny. It's a joke that's been around forever. But you and I, when I say you and I, I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about people in general in America today. We buy things that we can't afford. That's why they put credit out there back in the day. You know, you just go plop down a card and, oh yeah, I'll pay you over time. So we buy things we can't afford. And the things that we buy that we can't afford, we don't really need. And we buy them to impress people that we really don't even like. But we got ourselves in holes. Because we always have the best and the better and the newest, and we got to have more. This was first world problems. We got to have more stuff. And then what do we all get into? Man, my basement's a junk pile. I got so much stuff in there. I got to clean out one of these days. Well, why do you buy stuff in the first place? You buy it, you use it for a year, and you put it down in the basement somewhere in a box. You forget about it. But we got to have that stuff. That's what he's talking about. There's this guy that has all this stuff, and he tears down his barn, going to build a bigger one. And then he says to himself, look what he says. Here's the problem. And he says in verse 19, I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods. You got laid up for many years. Now just take some rest. Eat, drink, be merry. That's an Epicurean philosophy. The Greek Epicureanism in the ancient Greece, that's their philosophy. Just eat, drink, be merry. You know, just don't worry about anything. And he says, that's what I told myself. I built all this stuff. I can gather all this stuff. And in essence, he's saying, it's mine. I did it. I deserve it. I'm going to enjoy it. But evidently he got to the point where he couldn't even enjoy what he had because he run out of room to store it. And so Jesus told this parable for a point. He's going to make several points in here, but I want to make this one to you. Look at this guy, and I want you to notice the wording in here. the land of a rich man was very productive. Look at verse 17. He began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no place? Verse 18. Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns, large ones. I will store my grain. Verse 19. I will say to my soul, so you have many goods laid up, eat, drink, and be merry. In other words, God totally isolated himself. Evidently he had anybody to talk to. He's not running it by somebody else. He's not asking a friend. He's not getting any kind of advice from anybody. It's all about him. He is self-isolating himself. He's all by himself. And he's reasoning to himself, I did this, I deserve this. In other words, this guy is what we would call totally absorbed in his own life and his own affairs. Care less about anybody else. He doesn't care that some of the excess crop that he has is going to last him for years to come, he said. He doesn't care that his neighbor may be starving and he can take some of this excess and go help his neighbor. He don't care about that. It's about him. He's all wrapped up in himself. He's absorbed with who he is. In other words, he's completely missed the point of life. He just missed it. And Jesus took this opportunity when this guy came up and said, I want my money. I want my money now. Jesus, okay, let me tell you guys a story. Here's a story about a guy that's totally wrapped up in himself. Don't care about anybody else. He's missed the point of life. In other words, he thinks that what's really important is abundance. But that's not true life. That's not what it's all about. And so look at this in here, because he lacks a couple of things. And I want you to really think about this, because if we're really honest, one of these may hit us. Here's the three things this guy in this parable lacked. Number one, he lacked any sense of God. He didn't talk about God. He didn't say, God, what do you want? How can I serve you? He has no sense of God. And here's the big point. And this is what Jesus is really going to teach the disciples. He has no sense of stewardship. He has no sense that this belongs to God and he's just a steward of it. He has no sense of that. He says, this is mine. I built this. I deserve it. I'm going to build another barn to hold all my stuff. He has no sense of stewardship. And he has no sense of his responsibility to his fellow man. He didn't care that somebody may be starving. He just doesn't care. And then you get down to verse 20. But then Jesus is telling this, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who's going to own what you've prepared? All this stuff that you laid up, where's it going then? Because you lay up all this stuff, you work and accumulate, and you gather all this stuff, but you're not promised tomorrow. I'm not trying to be morbid or depressing or any of that stuff. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. Your life's like a vapor. It's here today, gone tomorrow. You're not promised tomorrow. I hope we're all here tomorrow. I hope we're all here Sunday for church. But you just don't know. And Jesus says, here's a story about this guy that built all this stuff. He accumulated all this stuff. And he says, I got it for years to come. It's all for me, years to come. But that night, God said, no, you're going to heaven tonight. You're dying tonight. And then Jesus, who's going to get the stuff? What good is it to have all that stuff? Because there's no preparation for it. Now, look at verse 22, because everything turns on verse 22. And he said to the who? Disciples. He's not talking to that guy. This is a message for the disciples. And by extension, me and you, because we're disciples of Christ. So what he's going to do now is going to talk about, from here to the end, he's going to talk about some fundamental instructions. The fundamental of how to live life. I mean, what's really important. So look at verse 22. He said to his disciples, for this reason, what reason? Because God called that guy out in the middle of the night. I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you'll put on. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Giving them fundamental instructions about life. He said, here's a guy that worked all his life and accumulated all this stuff. So much so he said, I got to tear down my barn and build bigger barns. And then God called him out of the world that night. And Jesus turned to his disciples and said, for this reason I say, you guys don't worry about that. Don't worry about what you're going to eat or what you're going to put on, because life is more than just the food you eat, and life is more than just the clothes you put on. How do we live our life? Gauging each other on those kind of things, you know. What we eat, what we put on, I mean, clothing. People, my goodness, they look at clothing and you judge on clothing and tennis shoes that you wear in high school and all kinds of stuff. Jesus said, don't take any thought for that stuff, because life is more than that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. That's why we have a policy here. I mean, as long as it's decent and in order, I don't care what you wear in here. You know, wear some pants, you know, wear some shorts. I don't care as long as they're decent and in order, you know. God doesn't care about that kind of stuff. And he says, and his major point though is, don't be anxious. See, it started out with a guy saying, tell my bird to give me my money. And Jesus now flipped it to say, no, what this is really about is you depending on God. It's about you being anxious for stuff. It's about you not worrying about stuff. Verse 24. Then he's going to give us some nature examples. And he says, consider the ravens, for they neither sow nor reap. They have no storeroom nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable you are than the birds. And I imagine they're outside when Jesus is teaching this, and a bird probably flew over, and Jesus probably said, hey, look at the bird, you know. That bird don't worry about anything. He don't have a big barn that he builds up. He doesn't have a storehouse for all the seed that he collects. He don't worry about it. He just flies around, does his business, and he knows that God's going to provide for him. And now, I know people think it's very simplistic, but the birds in my backyard, they probably have that same mindset. And I put a birdhouse out there, and I put bird seed in it. And so those birds, they don't have to worry about it. They fly in, and I got this thing loaded with bird seed. They sit on it, and they eat the bird seed. They don't understand that. I don't know what a bird thinks, but I'm sure they don't understand that every so many days Jeff's going to come out here and dump some bird seed in this bird feeder. They just know when I fly down there, it's going to be full of food. I'm going to eat it. Well, maybe it's providentially that God is making me put the bird seed in the thing so the birds can eat. Jesus said, look at those birds flying around. They're not worried about anything. That bird can't hold a job. That bird has no bank account. That bird has no savings account. That bird has no warehouse. That bird has no home, really. He lives in the trees, for crying out loud. But God takes care of him. And then Jesus said, aren't you a lot more valuable to God than that bird? So he's trying to drill down this thing about, number one, is stewardship. It's what we have belongs to God anyway. And number two, trust God for provision. God will provide for us. We can't, man, we worry so much. And some of us worry when we don't have anything to worry about. We like, man, I should be worried about something. I just don't know what it is. And we invent things to worry about. You know, and actually God said that's really a sin. Verse 25, look what he says. And which of you by worrying, just by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? Which of you is going to worry, and God's going to say, yeah, because of your worry, I'm going to bless you with another hour to live, or another day, or another 6 months. Which one of y'all, he says, do you think God is going to look at you and say, bless their heart, they're worrying, I'm going to let them live longer, just so they can worry more and worry longer? He said, that's not the way God works. He says, don't be anxious for this stuff. Remember this is the most important part of the parable. He told the parable this guy built bigger barns. You know, this guy had lots of stuff. He built bigger barns. But the message in the parable was what came after it, where he turns to the disciples and he says, listen, guys, I know you guys have to be worried because this is the journey section of Jesus. He is on his way to the cross. The attacks on him are intensifying. The threats from the Pharisees are increasing. The disciples are worried. They have no home. They're going from place to place. They're itinerant preachers going around Galilee. They're worried to death. And Jesus is trying to get them to understand that he's not going to be with them forever, that he's going to be crucified and ascend back to heaven. But they don't get it. All they are concerned with is, what are we going to eat tomorrow? We don't have any food. You know, we ran out of food. Our money ran out two towns back. And what are we going to do? And then this occasion comes up, and Jesus said, let me teach you something about this. You don't have to worry. You can't change anything by worrying. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I've worried a lot in my life, and not at one time have I worried. Has my worrying actually changed things? It just makes you sick to your stomach. You can't sleep. You can't eat, and there's nothing good comes out of it. And to be honest with you, most of the time in my life, the things I'm worried about never come to pass anyway. You know, I worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. What's my boss going to say when I get into the office tomorrow? What's this person going to? It never happens. You know, I worry myself for nothing. But we worry. That's how we do. Jesus don't do that. Now look at verse 26. If then you cannot do even a very little thing, why do you worry about other matters? And then he gives another example. Consider the lilies. Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, but I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. He said, look at the flowers. They don't do anything. A seed goes in the ground, they pop up. But Solomon, with all the splendor of Solomon's palace and all the wisdom of Solomon, he wasn't as pretty as these flowers. But they don't do anything. They just, a seed falls on the ground and it bursts open. It dies and it bursts open and it germinates and it comes out. This beautiful flower comes out. And Jesus said, just look at those. Look what they do. They don't toil or they don't spin. They don't work. They don't do anything. And so verse 28, Jesus says, but if God so clothes the grass in the field, he's talking about with the flower, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more will he clothe you? And then this is for the disciples. You men of little faith. Not only is it for the disciple, it's for me and you. Because what he's saying is, if you worry, you have little faith. He didn't say you have no faith. He said you have little faith. It's misplaced faith. It's inadequate faith. It's very weak faith. We're kind of going to talk about this Sunday morning. Sunday morning we're talking about the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of faith. One is phony faith and one is real faith. And the faith that me and you have sometimes is, God, if you'll do this for me, then I'll trust you. If you'll provide this for me, if you'll give me the house that I want, if you'll take care of my finances, bail me out of this situation I'm in, God, then I'm going to trust you. That's faulty, phony faith. Real, genuine faith is God, I'm going to trust you no matter what. It really doesn't matter because I know you have my best at heart and I know you have my best in your plan. And whatever that may be, I'll trust you with it. That's real, genuine faith. And that's what he's saying to the disciples. He said, listen, you guys have little faith. You got this really weak faith, this phony faith, because you're banking on things you can see, tangible things. You got to have money in your pouch, you got to have food in the basket, but I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it, I'll take care of you. Everybody in this room has been taken care of by God. Everybody in this room. Everybody in this room has stories about God has provided for us. When it didn't seem like there was a way, God made a way. Every one of us can testify individually, I'm sure, that not only did God bless you, he blessed you abundantly more than you deserve. Every one of us can testify that. But we worry ourselves sick in the process of it. So look at verse 30 then. For all these things, the nations of the world eagerly seek. Everybody else is looking at this stuff. But your Father knows that you need these things. And then, again, this is my life verse. It's Matthew records it again in Matthew chapter 6. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Seek his kingdom. Seek the Lord's kingdom first. And then he'll provide for you. but go after him first. Now, there's and I'm going to close by showing you this. There's a wider context to this in Luke's gospel, because Luke has a very definitive way of writing. He's writing this again in the context of Jesus going to the cross for us. And so when you look at this parable about God providing, and right here he's talking about food and clothes. He said, well, why are you worried about food and clothes? Life's more than that. It's more than what you eat or what you or what you wear. You know, we're kind of like the Israelites in the wilderness. You know, they're hungry. So what God do? Supernaturally provide manna. They know where it came from. Matter of fact, manhu in Hebrew is what it is. They didn't know what it was. But they knew every day they woke up it was there. And God specifically said, go out and get enough for today. Don't get more than you need for today, because it'll spoil overnight. Tomorrow there'll be more. And so they got up, they got their stuff, and they ate, and they were full. The next day, they did the same thing all over again. Until the manna wasn't enough. He said, God, we got to have meat. We're not vegetarians out here. You know, we need some meat. So God sent a bunch of quail where they couldn't even walk. It reminds me of me and you. It's always got to be better. You know, I'm trying not to be unfair or harsh when I say this. But what if our life got to the point where all we could afford was beanie wings? That's it. So you go to the store, you get some beanie wings, you get some hot dogs, cut them up, get some pork meat, throw in there, either buy a little can of beanie wings, whatever, heat them up in a thing, and you ate that every day. You wouldn't go hungry. Every day you'd have what you need, you'd be sustained. But how do you think it'll be before each one of us start fussing at, I can't eat another beanie weenie. I have something else. God, give me a steak. Give me something else. I can't eat beanie weenies anymore. It's kind of the thing. What I'm telling you is, we're very ungrateful in a lot of ways. God provides for us, but we want more because we think we deserve more. And so Luke's writing this in a wider context, though, because he says in here, this guy asks about an inheritance. So I told you a story about a man that had stuff, and he had to tear down barn, build bigger ones, but God called him out of this world. And I'm telling you not to worry. I'm telling you to be patient. God will take care of you just like he does the birds and just like he does the flowers. But in the wider, grander scheme of this, he's talking about Jesus going to the cross. He's talking about the ultimate provision. God just don't provide food and clothing for us. He provided salvation. He provided a forgiveness for myself. I mean, I sinned, grievously sinned, facing a death penalty, on my way to be eternally separated from God forever. And Jesus redeemed me. You're talking about providing. The greatest thing that mankind needs is not food, it's not clothing. It is the gospel. It's Jesus. And so when Luke writes this, he's writing this in this larger context. Remember, this is what we call the journey section. Jesus is on his way, and it's going to intensify. It's going to heat up. And every time Jesus, from this point, does a miracle, they get madder and madder until the point where John records in John chapter 11, where he raises Lazarus, and they all get in this little unholy huddle, and they say, we got to kill him now. He's so popular, and they like him so much, we got to get rid of him now. And so on the way to the cross, Luke is pointing out that, hey, okay, Jesus told this parable. And it really means something about, me and you not worrying and all this stuff. But really in this wider context, Jesus is on his way to do the ultimate provision for us. He's going to die on the cross, and it's going to save us. And so ultimately then, this parable is more about stewardship. It's more about what we owe God, because God blessed us with this stuff and it's not his. And so what do with it? I try to benefit somebody else. I try to enhance the kingdom, because I can't. What good is it if I lay up everything now? What good is it? My philosophy is I like to have savings. I mean, I do like to have savings because you never know. I mean, gotta lay up something for a rainy day one of these days. But I'm talking about me personally. But I don't want to save every dime I have. Some of the dimes I have, I want to go on vacation with my family and make memories while I'm here. You know, and Jesus's point is, everything that you have belongs to God. So you're required to be a good steward of it, to take care of it, to maintain it, to look out for it. And the essence really of the gospel is in this parable. And it's not just a parable, it's the aftermath of the parable. The essence of the gospel is this. You ready for this? Here's the essence of all this. You and I just have to have faith. We have to have faith, first of all, that Jesus is who he says he is, and that God is who he says he is, and that Jesus was God's son. Jesus died on the cross. Jesus was put in a tomb. Jesus was resurrected on the third day. Jesus ascended back to God. We have to have faith in that. That's what we call the gospel. You got to have faith in the gospel. Then we have to have faith that God will provide for us. And part of the reason God provides for us is that we're good stewards with what he has given us. We're good. We're generous. We're good. We're good. We take care of it, and then we take care of it, and then God blesses us. We don't take care of it, and if we're not good stewards, God's going to quit blessing us. So that's the ultimate part of this parable. Now look at verse 34. And this is, I'm going to say two more things. Verse 34. For where your treasure is, in your house, your car, your savings, 401k, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So, where's your treasure? If your treasure is in earthly things, that's where your heart's going to be. That's why people want to go get more and more and more stuff. That's where their heart is. But if their treasure's in heavenly things, then that's where their heart's going to be, if they want to invest into the kingdom. Now, I'll say this, the last thing I'll say, because Jesus says this at the heels of another parable. Here's what that means for us. Here's what that looks like for us. We have to daily take up our cross and follow him. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. Becoming a Christian is easy. Put your faith in God. Accept Jesus as it. Being a Christian is difficult. It requires us every day to sacrifice ourselves, to realize that we're dead to ourselves. The things that used to be important are not. You know, our priorities change. And we understand that God is going to bless us, and God is here to provide for us as long as we're good stewards of what he's already blessed us with. That's the whole point of the parable. Any questions about that one? Next week we're going to look at Luke chapter 15, and we're going to get 3 for 1, because there's 3 parables in the one telling that relate to each other. Any questions? Oh, not next week. Yeah, that's right. 2 weeks. Anybody? All right, well, I'm going to dismiss from our online crowd. Thank you guys so much.